Hey guys, it's Horror Free For All. You can also call me Goosebumps Completionist if you like. But I'm here today to talk about a kids' horror graphic novel that I want to review for you. I talked about the volume 1 of this series last year. And the series is written by James Powell and drawn by Jethro Morales. And it's none other than House of Fear. So I have here today volume 2 that I'm going to be reviewing for you guys. And I have a lot to say because House of Fear, since Volume 2 has dropped, has basically been, I guess, soft canceled by its creator, James Powell, which is sad, but I can clearly see that he had a lot of passion and a good eye for kids' horror in this series, and he brought kids' horror to comics in a way that I wish was continuously done by other creators. And I really do wish that a big name like Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark or Haunting Hour even, or anybody with some sort of brand recognition can take an idea like this and take it to a bigger publisher than what House of Fear had to work with and roll with it. Let this be the proof of concept for that. But for what House of Fear is on its own merit is a love letter to Goosebumps and kids horror, but also a love letter to Tales from the Crypt and Golden and Atomic Age horror comics. And I love this series to pieces. This second volume here, Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow, and Other Scary Stories, continues the tradition that volume 1 did with its original 5 stories included there. Except here, this has 8 stories, which makes the franchise 13, right? No. There's technically 14 stories, and I'm going to be including this in my Volume 2 review because this is the only story of the franchise that you need a standalone comic for, and that is the Grumple Downs Gang and the attack of the Mail Order Shoggoths. And from what I gathered, I've actually had conversations with James Powell in the past about this series, trying to get to know more about it. I was asking why wasn't this included in Volume 1, because when this comic released, it was very early on in the House of Fear franchise. And he basically said it was because he didn't write it. And I guess because Dark Horse, when they picked up the rights for House of Fear to publish it, might have not wanted a story that he didn't write in the mix. So he left this one out. And sadly, it was also omitted from this Volume 2, which was not produced by Dark Horse. It was actually produced by 1031 Publishing. And I could not find a copy for sale online at all. So I actually had to ask their creator to sell me a copy so I can get my hands on it. And I've had it ever since then. And I've been trying to review it for a long time. I just haven't had, I guess, the headspace or the time to do it. But here we are. Better late than never. And I recently actually reread all these stories for posterity for this review because I wanted to talk about this and kind of wrap up my thoughts with House of Fear. So House of Fear, at least with this volume, you can find Volume 1 online pretty easily. But recently, you can actually find the remaining copies that I guess are for sale on the internet on Amazon. So be rest assured, this standalone comic might be a nightmare to track down if you're trying to be a completionist for the series. But if you just want more content and maybe you have the Dark Horse Volume 1 in your collection and you don't have Volume 2, you can get this on Amazon. And I think 1031 Publishing themselves are selling this. And I guess once supplies last, they'll be gone when the last copy sells. So if you want this for your collection, pick it up now before it goes away. Pick it up now. I got lucky with the single comic here. You can possibly reach out to James himself, or maybe try to look online to see if there's a lot of comics that has it included. That might be a good route for you if you want every story, including Shoggoths here. So, with that being out the way, we have a lot of stories to talk about. We have 9 stories to finish out this franchise. And I'll get into my overall thoughts near the end of the video about the franchise as a whole. But I love it. It gets a hard stamp of approval for me. Go check out House of Fear. If you want the easier accessible stories to get, you can easily find the Dark Horse Volume 1 out there on the internet. Try that volume, and if you get hooked, then you're in the same boat with me. And you can experience these Volume 2 stories as well if you'd like. So, because this one is by itself, I guess I'll start here because we have 9 stories to go over. We're going to go ahead and talk about this Grumble Downs gang in the Case of the Mail Order Shoggoth story. So this is the only one not written by James Powell. And can I say that this is one of my favorites of the House of Fear series? Shockingly enough. This is like a throwback story to DCOMs in like the late 90s, early 2000s, or movies like The Goonies or Monster Squad. If you love stuff like that, you're going to love this story. If you love H.P. Lovecraft and you love kids horror, this is a good marriage of that. There's so many things about this that just scream retro 90s kids horror that it makes my heart melt. But all you need to know about this story is that it takes place on Halloween, and these 3 kids called the Grumble Downs gang are essentially resident horror aficionados, and our main character here has decided to order this horror toy from this magazine or website called, Shoggoths in a Packet or something, that when you put them in water, supposedly they turn into actual monsters. And because their school is having a Halloween carnival this year, he thought it'd be fun to, I guess, create his own monsters for Halloween to be in the festive spirit. And he brings these packets into his classroom to show his friends, but unfortunately, the teacher sees it, confiscates it, and once class is dismissed, he goes to the bathroom to flush the Shoggoth packets down the toilet, which, of course, brings the Shoggoths to life. And when the Halloween carnival at school happens later on, the Shoggoths comes out of the woodwork from the piping in the walls and what have you, and wreaks havoc on all the participants. I love this story. This had a grand scope to it. It had like that throwback feel to it. There's something about it that just felt cozy. And it melted my heartstrings. And whoever who wrote this story, the Grumble Downs gang needs to come back as reoccurring characters, because they all had fun, distinct personalities. And, this is a comic book, so for this being like a single issue, I think these are like 14 to 18 pages long. So about a normal, indie published comic book length. Even though I think for a story like this probably could have benefited from 28 to 48 pages, just saying. But it was still fine nonetheless. My biggest gripes with this story, if I had any, was that it had a nice scope to it, but this could have been expanded on way more. This could have been more movie quality if they wanted to be. If this was like a 48-page just special graphic novel thing that you can buy maybe for like an upcharge for like $10 or $12, that's probably the best bet for a story like this. And like I said, my biggest gripe is that I just wanted more with the story. On top of it already just being great, then you've done something good here. I'd probably give this like a 4.6 out of 5 stars. It's on the lower end of great for a comic book story for me, but easily one of my favorites from the House of Fear series. So the remaining 8 stories actually come from this trade here. So we're going to kind of barrel through these because we have a lot to talk about. I'm just going to go in order as you read them in this trade. So the first story here is called Rubber and Glue. Now, Rubber and Glue is a different feeling story than the rest of the franchise because this is actually more of a wraparound-centric story with the mascot of House of Fear, Boyle, who's essentially if Curly from Goosebumps actually had a personality. Boyle's fun. I love Boyle. And he's going on this escapade. I know I didn't show art for Grumble Downs gang, but here, I'll go ahead and show you art for the remaining stories as we go along. He's on this escapade to go get a mummy from this, tomb. It's really funny. But the main story here involves a bully protagonist who gets cursed by his victim. And as the title alludes, it's a play on the phrase, "I'm rubber, you're glue. Anything you say to me bounces off to me and sticks to you." And that's basically all you need to know going into it. The bully thinks he's having nightmares about this kid, and then he has these bad things and bad omens happen to him, and he puts 2 and 2 together and blames his bully victim of cursing him, and the two kind of hash it out, and there's some hunky-dory, kumbaya, copacetic ending involving that. Not quite my speed. This is not a story that I think warranted its own issue for how short it was. This and another story, I probably would have suggested that these two would have been combined into its own book if you're going to have these two short stories put into the franchise. But nonetheless, this one was just kind of meh. I like the moral message to it. And honestly, I like the Boyle wraparound more than the actual story itself. But there's some, serviceable ideas. Kind of Are You Afraid of the Dark in nature. I'd probably give this one maybe like a 3.2 out of 5 stars, though. It's like a light okay, but just mostly meh kind of thing. So that's where I'm at with that one. It's definitely one of the weaker House of Fear stories. But it's not bad. It's not bad, just kind of there. The next one. Now this one's called The Infestation of Mr. Skinny Legs. And I'm just going to show you a picture of my favorite panel in this collection here. Look at this. You got a guy turning into a spider. And you might be like, well, what the crap is this story about? Well, the story is about a family, mainly focused around the perspective of this girl and her younger brother, who have this spider infestation problem in their basement, so they call this exterminator to come eradicate the issue. And the older sister thinks it's funny to kind of pester the younger brother for being paranoid about spiders and insects and whatnot, which plays a role once the exterminator leaves, of the sister, tormenting him further about it. And later that night, the brother ends up going missing out of his room, and the older sister catches wind of that and goes to try to find him. But she hears some screaming down in the basement and notices that when she goes down there, there's like this mysterious cavern underneath her house. And she goes in to investigate as she hears more screaming and finds her brother in the middle of this cavern with these giant spiders and the exterminator guy. And there's a big old plot twist involving the exterminator guy and what he's doing to spiders, perhaps making them larger. And there's this weird, wild backstory about experimentation on animals and humans with spider DNA, and as you can tell, it goes batshit crazy involving that, and it builds up to an over-the-top climax and how to resolve said villain. And the ending is very ambiguous, and it's almost too large scale for its own good, because honestly, the story could have just kept going further from there, but it's one of those open-ended endings to kind of leave it off on a chilling note, to say the least. But all in all, The Infestation of Mr. Skinny Legs. I wanted to outright love this one, but I think what holds this one back, sadly enough, is how cut and dry the story is. You kind of know where it's going to go at a certain point, pretty much within the first 2 pages. But once you get to the fun stuff, it is good. But like I said, this has a bigger scope, kind of like something like the Grumple Downs gang story we already talked about, where this could have been, 28 to 48 pages. But this is easily one of the more fleshed out House of Fear stories at the same time, so I can't be too mad at it. But, with that being said, could have been more, and I kind of wish there was. But this is like the inverse side of that for Grumple Downs gang. So, because of the inverse, I'll probably give this a slightly lower score than Grumple Downs, and I'll give it like a high B plus at a 4.4 out of 5 stars. It's pushing that A tier, just needed a little more there for me. But that's where I'm at with it. Great villain, over the top, and it's fun. It's probably one of the most fun House of Fear stories. Which brings us, ironically, to a story that I'm probably the most conflicted on, and this next one is easily my least favorite of the whole franchise. And it's called Bria the Barbarian. Now, Bria the Barbarian takes place on Halloween, and it involves more medieval stuff and, character explorations. I did not know going into this that this story itself was a prequel of sorts to a story in Volume 1 from the Dark Horse volume called Attack of the Killer Snowman. And you learn that near the end of the story, which I thought was a really cool callback and tie-in to that story. It perhaps actually fixed the context to that story in hindsight of how the kid ended up with what he did. But nonetheless, this story on its own merit, it's about this girl named Bria and her friends as they're trick-or-treating on Halloween. And all of a sudden, this interdimensional portal opens up in the top of the sky, And these elephant creatures and giant dragons and all this stuff come flooding out of this portal. And there's this woman that comes to Bria and essentially tells her that she needs their help to defeat these creatures and send them back where they came from. So Bria is literally tasked with sending the creatures back up to the portal, and the portal should close in time, and they only have a certain amount of time to do it because it's on Halloween when these portals do open, and we find out what's going to become of that. So yeah, this one wasn't scary at all. It had a cool concept about, I guess, costumes kind of coming to life and you role playing and like LARPing, I guess, which I think this was kind of just like a stab at it in some ways. But like this is like, if you're not going to be horror with it, then you should be fantasy and science fiction with it. But if you're going to be fantasy and science fiction with it, you should still try to be scary when you're a horror series. You know, there's nothing about this that is scary, and I don't see even like the littlest of kids finding these elephant creatures or these dragons terrifying. And for what it is, for the novelty of it being like a prequel to Attack of the Killer Snowman, that ending really does kind of save it for me, because I didn't quite find it bad, but it was just really mid. You know what I mean? This is probably one of the most mid stories I've ever read in the genre. But it had some, you know, decent aspects to it, enough for me not to full on hate it. I'd probably give this like a 3 out of 5 stars, though. If I'm being honest, like, not an idea I would have put into this series, and it's easily the most expendable idea from this whole volume. Sorry, I just had to be honest. They could have just put Grumble Down's gang in here and just called it a day. But yeah, if you're a fan of Attack of the Killer Snowman, you should read this one. Moving on to the next one, we have another short story, kind of similar to Rubber and Glue here, and this one is called The Trees Have Eyes. Now, The Trees Have Eyes is a, like I said, a very, very short one. It's about a kid, as you can see, dealing with some trees. Story is super short and easy to follow. This kid and his dad are out in the middle of the woods, and the kid, he's kind of like, a rambunctious type, likes to get in some trouble, go off on his own and do his own thing. And he hears this legend of these trees, especially like these white colored trees, that he thinks is kind of neat. But he also sees that the trees are littered with, carvings from people on the bark. So he thinks it's a good idea to go carve his name into one of the trees. But when he does so, it perhaps invokes the wrath of these trees, who might be sentient eye creatures. I'll just leave it at that. And without going any further, because as soon as you see this phenomenon start, it kind of has to wrap up quickly because they're trees, and you have to keep the threat within the child's radius, if you get what I'm saying. And we see what's going to become of the kid. And there's kind of like a warped, dark ending with the dad at the end, involving what happened to his kid. But that aside, yeah, this one is kind of damned by its length and the concept itself. This reminds me of The Leaving from Volume 1. It's a super short concept. It's not supposed to be the deepest thing ever. And I wouldn't be shocked if this and The Leaving are connected in some ways. Or perhaps associated with a similar idea. But this one I did like a little more because the visuals with what happened to the kid was pretty gnarly. Was not expecting that. It went very dark for no reason. But yeah, it's a good story for what it is. Nothing too groundbreaking, nothing too spectacular. I'd probably give this like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, it's on the lower end of good, but it's serviceable. So moving on to the next story after that, we have a story called All That Glitters. And this story, I'm going to go ahead and show you a picture real quick. This one is super wild and fun. And this one, I was not expecting like a deeper allegorical type of tale for this series, but it was very allegorical, and it was coming to talk about moving away and, moving away from your friends and stuff like that. And the story quite literally uses that as a motif in the story itself. But this story is a bit more fleshed out with the characters than your average House of Fear story. It involves these two girls who are best friends, but they're about to be torn apart because one of the girls is moving to a different place in the country because her dad is short on money and he needs to go find a job that pays more so him and his daughter can have a better life. And they're on this vacation of sorts at the beach, having one last get together before the girls are separated forever. And one of the girls' brothers comes out of the water with a gem that looks like a diamond or like a gold diamond and says that there's a bunch of them out in the water. So the girl who isn't moving away decides to take her friend into the water, and she is so excited at the possibility of finding a fortune of these gems so they can collect them and sell them so that way her friend doesn't have to move away. And for the remainder of the story, the girl tries and tries and tries to fight the water, fight the depths, to go down and retrieve these gems, which just so happen to be protected by these alien-looking creatures that are essentially using these gems as bait to capture prey. And once the girl starts to get injured and has these close calls, her best friend has to essentially step in and say, hey, look, I appreciate what you're doing, but there's no changing the inevitable. I'm going to be moving away. There's no need to kill yourself or hurt yourself over me staying here. We should just enjoy the time we have together. And once that is said, we find out what's going to become of these two girls and their friendship moving forward. And I think this one is a very poignant and powerful story. This has a very deep message to it. It's a story that makes you think, and it does what it needs to do in that regard. In terms of its monsters, though, they're kind of on the sillier side, and I kind of wish they played more into that motif a bit. This is a story that I think could have been fleshed out into, a bigger thing than what it was. Perhaps maybe it could have been a couple of days that this stuff was going on, and we could have had this conflict brewing over a couple of days, and the stakes keep growing and growing and growing, and maybe we can kind of build into the false hope narrative a bit with this with the tale. But for what it was, the story was compacted enough to have a resounding impact as it was. One last negative with it, though. For some reason, I feel like the story's pace, it was trying to barrel through some things so it can get to what it was trying to say with it. But all in all, I came out really enjoying this one. I think it's a very good one. Not quite great, but if it had maybe a larger scope to it and it played a little more into the character friendships and stuff, this could have been a way higher score. But I gave this a 4 point, or maybe I gave this a 4.1 out of 5 stars. It's a light, very good. Moving on to the next story here, though. This is a slight step up from All That Glitters, and this one's called Waiting in the Wings. And if you love body horror, you're going to love this story. I mean, here's a little sample of what you're going to expect out of the story. You see this kid peeling at his skin. Something is wrong there, right? So this one is about this kid who has this leading role in the school play. But there's these moths and the costumes that he's supposed to be wearing for the school play. And he perhaps inhales one of these moths, which end up kind of metamorphosizing him, similar to an iconic horror movie involving an insect being ingested, or I guess molecularly spliced into human DNA, if you get my drift. And we see this kid slowly start to have this body horror start to happen to his neck area and his face and his stomach. And then he gets this urge on the stage on the day of the play, because there's this huge tree on the stage, to go, I guess, camp out up there. And I'm just going to leave it there with that. And we see once the play kicks on that there's a transformation to be had that the whole audience gets to see. Now, this story also has an alternate title. I think it was originally called That's a Wrap when it came out in its comic version. But I think when it got put into this trade, they changed it to Waiting in the Wings. Both titles work. And this one, like I said, it had some body horror elements to it that I think could have been possibly even pushed further. I feel like the exploration into that was cut very short. and because of the length of the comics themselves, this is one that I do wish, kind of like All That Glitters and some other ones we talked about, had a longer page count, because you could have easily built on the existential idea of trying to preserve your humanity with a story like this. And really, they should play on that more in kids' horror. But there's no play on that, which I think is a missing element for a story like this. And I dig the whole transformation element also, but the ending kind of takes it back for me because of how cheesy it comes across when it should be absolutely horrifying. Even though there is some horrific elements to it. I'd probably give this one maybe like a 4.25 out of 5 stars, though, all said and done. Nothing too out there or wrong with it, just could have been better in some areas. And which brings me to the last 2 stories of the collection. We have the story that the collection is titled after, Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. This one I think is my easy favorite from this volume because of how dark it goes. This is one of those stories, if you're a fan of like Goblin Monday's twist, or Werewolf Skin's twist, or the Tale of Vampires Town's twist, you're going to love this. And this is a short and simple one, but it works. So this is more of like a cautionary tale, like you should listen to your parents kind of thing. But this boy who loves playing baseball is told by his father to not go play in the street, because the last time he went to play in the street, he had to get grounded because he broke neighbor's property. And he's told that if he's going to go practice, to go to the park. But when he goes outside, these boys on the street kind of coax him and peer pressure him to, of course, play baseball on the street. And he can't resist, so he decides to play. And sure enough, he knocks a baseball into his neighbor's window, and he has to go retrieve the baseball. But once his friends pretty much disappear because the house has this weird phenomenon going about it, the kid goes to knock on the door and sees that there's a woman there who lets him in and allows him to, I guess, get his baseball. But while he's in there, she's like kind of weird, and she's like, you know, we're making dinner right now. We'd be glad if you wanted to eat with us. But the kid notices that there's this man sitting on like the sofa in the room who is like stationary and not doing anything. And then it turns out there's this huge Deus Ex Machina involving the woman. And let's just say things do not end up well for this kid at all. And it goes there. I mean, it goes there. And the monster in this story, it's called Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. This is the kid in the story. What do you think this is? I'm not even going to describe the monster. Just use your imagination. Yeah, it is creepy. It is super creepy. Really, what set this one over for me was how dark it got, really. The fact that the story was willing to go there gave it a lot of points for me. This is another one, though, that sadly falls into that camp that this could have been expanded on a bit better. It didn't really capitalize on all the points that something like Teeth did from Volume 1 or Curse of the Cottonwood Court. This could have been, you know, a little bit stronger in some areas with its story. But other than that, I'd probably give this like a 4.7 out of 5 stars. So, nothing else to say other than those common ailments that some other stories have had as well. Which brings me to the last story. Now, this one is called Hollow, and this is another Halloween-themed story. And this one involves pumpkins and trick-or-treating on Halloween. That's really all you need for stories like this, right? But this one is kind of a touching story when you think about it. It's about this older brother who is kind of envious of his younger brother, who is much talented at creating jack-o'-lanterns than him. And the mom seems to put down the older brother about it to the point where he gets very insecure. And when they go to put their jack-o'-lanterns out before they head out to trick-or-treat, the kid throws a temper tantrum and smashes his pumpkin on the ground, which he thinks looks like crap, which in turn destroys his brother's jack-o'-lantern. And because he did this, the neighbors' jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins on all the surrounding porches sees this behavior and decide to step in and interfere. And while the boys are trick-or-treating together, we see that the older brother has a heart-to-heart with the younger brother about feeling inferior. And then the pumpkins come out of the woodwork to make their presence known, which brings them closer. And the younger brother pretty much admits, like, yeah, you might be inferior at me than, carving jack-o'-lanterns, but you are better at me at athleticism and protecting yourself, and we can work together for this one night to help defeat the problem. And that's essentially the story. I'm not going to get into how the twist plays out or anything, but yeah, this one, solid atmosphere like the other Halloween stories. This one probably had the best, even over Grumbledown's Gang or the other one that I talked about, which was that one? Bria the Barbarian. This one feels traditional Halloween. The concept feels ripe out of something like Goosebumps. You have a cautionary element to it. My big problems with it, though, it's very predictable. You know the angle where it's going. The inciting incident of like the jack-o'-lantern stuff. I mean, like, you can kind of put two and two together that this could be related to another story in House of Fear. And I think it's actually implied to be also related to Attack of the Killer Snowman in some ways. But even then, like the inciting incident, you need to be a bit better with that. And especially in setting up the characters, I think the biggest damning thing about this story is that you don't like the older brother in the beginning of the story. He just seems like a whiner, which he does get better over time in the story. But yeah, not a good way to start it off. But where it ended up, I think, kind of did help save it. You know what I mean? So this one, I was on the fence whether I wanted to give this a 4 or like a 3.9, which is like a C plus or a B minus. But I ended up giving this a C plus at a 3.9 out of 5 stars. Could have been way better than what it was, but it's pretty good for a comic story, and it does what it needs to do. So that's all you really can ask for. So yeah, those were all 9 stories in Volume 2, which added together with Volume 1 equals 14 total stories. Now, I'm going to say this up front. I really enjoyed this series. I did not find one story to be outright bad. And the thing is, Jethro Morales brought these stories to life. Here, I'll go ahead and show you some other artwork that he did. And just look at this. Like, look how he brings Boyle to life. You have a great mascot here in Boyle. You have an artist who really has a passion for this stuff. There's even like some vignettes and mock-ups of the comics themselves where they try to replicate people asking questions to Boyle and stuff like that. I mean, this just is a passion project through and through with great artwork, great monster designs. Most of the time, good morality tales in the mix. And there's some envelope-pushing stories for kids' horror. Now, I'm not saying that kids' horror always needs to be, we need to be pushing the violence onto kids. No, that's a little too much. But when it goes there, when it's warranted in the story, and not just there as like we're just going to tackle through this stuff as a plot beat kind of thing. No, there's actual purpose to it in the story. It can serve a really great impact. And a lot of these stories did push the envelope with creatures and what you can show in kids' horror. And specifically with stories like Teeth and the Infestation of Mr. Skinny Legs, these monsters are terrifying. Like straight up nightmare fuel. And or even the monster from Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, the one that I refuse to describe. These are fantastic villains. And they're most of the time fun, innocent stories to be had that do offer a little more bite because of the visual medium as a comic. Now, I will say the series has 2 glaring problems. 2 glaring problems. The first one being the length of the comics. You can't tell. I'll just show an example here. These are actually, standard length, like 14, 16 page comics, which are inoffensive for a kid. Kids, especially who read comics, most likely don't like reading actual books. At least that was experience for me growing up, kind of. I liked reading stuff like Goosebumps and Animorphs, but outside of that, I mainly read comics. Unless it was like a book for class or there was a book that caught my attention. So thinking back on what it was like to be a kid reading comics, I feel like keeping them short does help that, especially if the aim is to market to them. The problem with some of these stories, though, is that you have these great scope movie quality ideas that you can tell in a comic with like 48 pages and be perfectly fine. You can make these little graphic novel series instead of single issue comics and sell them that way. I think they could have made more money that way. But they didn't do that. They truncated the stories further sometimes than what they needed to be, I feel. And that kind of took away from the stories being better realized, in my opinion. And the second biggest problem with this series is the fact that nobody has heard of it. And that's not a constructive problem with the series, is that nobody heard of it. The publishers that did acquire this series didn't know what to do with it, I feel. And Dark Horse missed out on a good opportunity. And I think James Powell did what he could with Volume 2 to self-publish it. I'm still impressed that he wanted to at least try self-publishing to see what it can do for him. Sadly, I don't think we're going to get more of this series, but it's a valiant effort. And I would totally welcome him to come back to this, and I would be a customer. I know that they've tried Kickstarter a few times. James, if you're out there watching, if you have any stories out there in the ether or in your mind and you want to make more House of Fear content, please put it out there on Kickstarter. I will definitely be a backer because I want to see some more adventures that you have cooked up. And I want more Boyle. Can we have a petition to at least bring Boyle back in something else if he's not going to continue on in this? Boyle deserves better. So yeah, until we get more word on House of Fear, I guess this is where I'm at with the franchise, and this is all I have to say for this review. Let me know down in the comment section if you have been able to read House of Fear. Let me know if you've read Volume 1, or maybe you've gotten Volume 2 and you've read this, or maybe you've read the single issue here as well. What's your thoughts on this series? And more importantly, if you could pick a franchise to do a series like this, which one would you pick? Would you pick Are You Afraid of the Dark? Would you pick Goosebumps? I know both of them have comic book series currently out, like Goosebumps Graphics, and Are You Afraid of the Dark has a graphic novel series. But do you want them to do it in this style and not the style that they're currently doing? Dying to know down in the comment section. Until next time, take care and stay spooky.